for helping us at Project Insight all these years. So thank you.
Many
And
years.
we're really privileged to have her help teach this class today.
Yeah, so we're looking forward to it. So last month we had part one of the series, and this is the second part of the series where, startups and founders of startups, there's always some challenges that they have to overcome because resources are never fully accessible. So there's a lot to overcome. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk about how you build those accountable teams to help you scale. How you go from 0 to 30 million, 30 billion if you want to. How we're going to turn that delivery into the driver of growth and retention, which, there's a lot of project managers that come to our webinars. You guys are a big part of the growth of any organization, and specifically, very, very specifically with small startup organizations as well. And we're also going to talk about how the sales, the delivery, the customer success, the support, and the product teams all need to work together to ensure that success, and what you can do to facilitate that as a founder. And also look at how we can increase your capacity through various operating options that are available today that maybe weren't available 3 or 5 years ago. So I'm looking forward to having this conversation. Steve is our resident startup expert himself because he did start this organization, so he has lots of great anecdotes and stuff that he can share with us as we go along. So let's get going.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So from our last webinar, we talked about, how do we make sure that priorities are clear, that we as an organization have a vision, that we know which things are the most important initiatives for us to execute on in any particular year. We also learned that, it's the importance of founders to delegate and not put everything on their shoulders, finding those right people that they can delegate to, taking the time to make sure those individuals understand, what they're supposed to be doing, why they're doing it, and then be able to step back and allow others to deliver on the strategy that founder has put together. Additionally, making sure that your team can handle the day-to-day. Because again, one of the hardest things for founders to do is, they start with an idea. It's their baby. It's their passion. If you're in technology, they're probably the technologists that have been in the weeds in that technology, know every little nuance of it. One of the hardest things to do is to pull themselves out and be a founder for the organization. Early on, before you do that first beta or that first prototype, you can stay in the weeds. You can absolutely stay in the weeds. But if you want to have your organization grow, you have to be able to pull yourself back and allow others to do for you, which is what we talked about in our first webinar. So we don't want to be that bottleneck. We don't want the founders to be the bottleneck of operations because they spend all their time in the product, working the product. That never happened to you, Steve, did it?
Yes. I mean, it's hard to do. It's hard not to get involved. And I'm not saying that. Well, I would never say that a founder or CEO shouldn't get involved, but you just need to know when you're blocking other people.
Right. And blocking other people from learning too. I've seen that a lot. Not necessarily you, but I've seen where a lot of founders, there's a big issue that happens and they basically say, out of my way, I'll fix this. And that's not the right thing to do either, because
Yeah.
basically you become the person that needs to solve everything. And,
Yeah.
being able to step back is the first challenge that a founder needs to.
Well, and I think just not to get too far off track from our webinar, but founders can be the creator of the product, or it can be the promoter or a seller, someone who sells, someone who's in marketing. There's
Mhm.
CEOs and founders come in all different. Uh,
Flavors. Mhm.
yeah, exactly. So, obviously, if you're going to delegate out, delegating things that are not in your core competency are the easiest ones to do right away, right out of the gate. It's like, okay, I'm not like me. I'm more engineering, more product. So I don't run sales department, right?
Right.
So those are the
Right.
easy ones to to get yourself out of quickly.
I agree. I agree. And then, so let's say you do recognize that you need to back out of that detail work. Those founders, they've created the initial value, like to your
Hmm.
point, Steve, whether that was an idea that they found, that they were the technologist on it, whether that was an idea that they were able to get others to develop a product, whether it was an idea that was a tangible, sellable item, retail item. Uh, they create that value, and then the next thing is to really start, organizing and coordinating that value. And they finally get some clients, right? And once they get some clients, then we hit another ceiling. Basically, the founder's starting to limit the value because they don't have enough people to do the operational work that to be successful. Many times, I let's use a project management example. Years ago, one of the founders I worked with, he didn't really understand what project managers do every day. He just thought it was like handling meetings. And so he would literally say, well, just do that project management stuff, right? Not thinking about the complexity of that role because
Hmm.
he's never done it before,
Yeah.
right? So if you've never done every role in an organization in the past, do you have any context to understand what it takes to do a good job in a role? And that's the next phase where, okay, I've decided to delegate certain things that I was doing, but now I have clients and now I have an organization that I have to fill roles that we never had before, right? I got to have the support role. I've got to have a product team role. I've got to have, delivery role. I've got to have a customer success role, but I've never done those before. So that's where they start limiting themselves because they don't necessarily have the experience of what it takes to do those roles successfully. And and they're not all founders. I mean, there's founders that have run large companies and start things over, but I'm talking about the ones that maybe for the first time and haven't. But it still is important to not underestimate the complexity needed to successfully operate an organization. And that's what we're going to talk about more today. So to kind of come back to the difference between a founder-led and a very scale-ready organization. Founder-led, you typically have that tribal knowledge. Those founders and their partners, they know the inner workings of that product, of that service that they're providing. They're okay with constant interruptions. It's like you're sitting in a room and everybody's just kind of talking and asking questions, and you got your sleeves rolled up and you're just getting the work done. Right, Steve? That's how you guys, that's what it was. It was probably 2 or 3 of you in a room working on Project Insight
Well, in the
25 years
beginning,
ago.
I mean, you're always just trying to get the ball moving, and it's not wrong. It's just where you are in your
Yeah,
stages.
yeah. It's just the reality of where, the dynamics of that kind of environment. This is why a lot of people, they're either really good in kind of a startup,
Yeah.
small business kind of environment, or they're really good in a very large organization. And you'll see that, as organizations grow, personalities do better in one or the other. Me personally, I personally like the smaller size organization than the large behemoth organizations, which is why we're talking about this. So anyway, I digress.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about founder led, a lot more reactive because you want to gain those first couple clients, and because you may not know everything, those clients are going to make suggestions and you're going to be a lot more reactive in a startup kind of environment than you would in a larger more I don't want to say organized, but more structured environment. And there's this informal accountability. Everybody is there because they like you, Steve. They want Steve to succeed. They liked his vision. They like where you're taking Project Insight. There's that camaraderie in a founder-led environment.
Yeah, and there's levels of what we're about to talk about here with scale, right? I mean, we're talking about this very startup to let's scale something at all. But obviously, then once you are scaling, there's new challenges for the next level of scaling, and then the next
Absolutely.
level of scaling all the way out.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was watching a little video clip the other day, and it was like, how many board members should you have? Well, I wasn't even thinking about it. How many board members should you
Yeah.
have, depending on the size of your business? I was like, oh, never even thought of that one, but it made some sense. But to your point, now when we start getting some level of scale, what you start seeing is successful scaling organizations have some level of documented processes. They have
Yeah.
some level, and I say that in quotes, some level of, because it doesn't have to be super formal. Some
Well, I
level
mean,
of
the
defined
first
workflows.
version's not going to be.
Sometimes people think it should be,
Well, then
so
you're gonna bog yourself down.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly what happens. So you want to have that right sizing of
Hmm.
processes and workflows that help you get to that next level. And now with the onset of AI, that needs to be part of the conversation too. You
Yeah, I
know,
think so. I mean, you definitely want to know like what AI platform or platforms are we going to use? How are we going to share this data? Because documented processes now are a lot easier to do with AI or have AI understand what your processes are. But you do have to at least stop yourself and say, okay, what are the things that everyone knows we do that we just do that don't have no information anywhere? So that all I think all of these three things to go together, documented processes, workflows, and defining your AI strategy, I think that they're kind of go in tandem with each other. You
yeah,
definitely need the documentation so your AI can read it. You can also use the AI to help you with help you with your documented
part
processes now, which is a big boost over, what you had to do 20 years ago or 30 years ago even.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And then, as we said earlier, one of the biggest, things that founders need to learn how to do is to learn how to successfully delegate. So now you're starting to see some successful delegated ownership of the work. The founder can step back. And to your
Yeah.
point, I agree with you. Delegate the work that you're not comfortable with, right? That
Yeah,
you
for
want to have
sure.
somebody it's a better fit for, and at some point you got to get yourself all the way out. But, where do you start? Get to the point where you're delegating the work that you feel that that's not your expertise.
Well, and
And
this is another tricky area because talking about delegation, re- that may involve hiring somebody. And
then,
if you're not familiar with an area, then it's going to be really difficult for you to find the right kind of fit. But also at the same time, this is where a a founder leader, if you find someone who's an expert at something and you bring them on board, then you don't need to you don't actually have to worry about the things that they're going to bring in terms of letting them it's a lot easier if you bring in someone, quote, they always say bring someone smarter than you. I mean, and
Mhm.
that's like the reality here is if you're not a if you're I think sometimes people tend to bring in people that are like them. You probably should be thinking about who's not like me that can help us is really
Yep.
the trick here, and it's not easy.
Yeah, and we're actually going to talk a little bit more about that too as we go through,
Yeah.
because there's so many options founders have today to find that right resource. So we definitely will talk further
Yeah,
about
we'll
that.
dig into that.
Yep. The other thing that you start seeing in a scale ready kind of organization, which again we talked about last month, was that strategic prioritization. What are the three things that we absolutely need to accomplish this year? Get client A onboarded, by the beginning of November. You know, deliver these two new features in our product by the end of the year. Sales needs to achieve, X percent, X dollar amount in our first year. We need to have three, pilots going on. Whatever those strategic priorities are, the
Hmm.
founder needs to define those and communicate those well so that everybody can be, tracking along with it. And, it's all about communication. And if you can communicate and people understand what those goals are, and you'd be surprised how many people don't. the larger those organizations, there's so many times you can ask somebody what are the 3 strategic goals for the organization? They're like, well, I don't know. I'm just doing my job. You know,
Yeah.
um, they're accountable to like doing the job that has been given to them, but they have no sense of where that job fits into the overall strategy of the
Yeah.
organization. And that's when you get that accountability. It's like, I understand where my role is. Like, let's use a project manager. You're responsible for implementations. Your role, we said number one, was to get client number one up and running by November. That's how you're going to impact the strategic vision of this organization, and you'll be accountable, and you should hold yourself accountable to doing that.
Yeah, and I think if you're a project manager, I mean, obviously as a small company, it's easier to find what those strategic priorities are or your goals and possibly prioritize it because you don't have a lot less going on. But let's say you're not working in a small company and you're in a big company. As a project manager, you should try to seek out what
Mhm.
are those strategic goals. If their CEO isn't actually like clearly articulating it to you, then you should just go seek it out for yourself because it will help you with your decision making process with
Yep,
projects.
I agree. And you'll be surprised. There's a lot of founders, startup companies that don't realize they need to communicate their
Well,
strategic
yeah. I mean, I
priorities
think
out there either.
I get that because I'm always like, why don't
Why don't
when
they know
people,
this?
how come
Well,
everybody doesn't know what's in my head right now?
yeah, because it's been in your
But
head
that's what,
for 20
yeah,
years,
right.
right? It's not
Yeah.
been in their head for maybe 3 months,
Yeah.
right?
And
So,
it's hard to take the time to do that.
mhm.
I've definitely personally challenged with making sure that I spend the time, you know, putting down things in front of people, and you have to repeat it over and over and over again.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
mhm.
Awesome. So um from a success standpoint, ensuring that people are accountable is actually more important than just bringing on bodies, right?
Well,
You
for
know,
sure, because you're not going to have the funds if you're a startup. You're going to actually have to do this really well because there's the trick between, gee, I want to delegate, but I don't have the resources to do it. Or even if you have deep pockets from your startup, some of these AI startups are getting hundreds of millions of dollars up front. You don't want to waste it.
no, and like the last highlighted thing says, I'm gonna kind of go backwards on this slide. It says not everyone needs to be another VP. So often I see, startups say, you know what, I'm going to bring this person on, I'm going to make them the CTO, or I'm going to make them the CRS. Like, they haven't even proven themselves yet, right?
Mhm.
So there's so many options that founders have to, because they need to grow as well. Like, if they've never started their own business before, like I said earlier, there's different roles that maybe you're not familiar with. There's new tools like AI that maybe you've never used before. Like, how do I best do this? And companies have a lot of options now. They can be looking at, where can AI fill a role for me that I don't, I mean, it's not free. You still have to, set up the AI, manage the AI, et cetera. But it's, where can the AI give me a leg up on not having to hire on certain resources? That's definitely one option. You know, I see founders choose cheap over experienced, just
Mhm.
because they're trying to, squeeze as much out of their funds that they have, which I can appreciate. But more times than not, cheap ends up not working out in the long run. I mean, there was one time, not that it was, if you finding somebody that has the right skills. There was one time when I had 2 business analysts that were working with me on a project, and we were trying to bring on another business analyst, and we could not find a good experienced business analyst. And rather than just hiring somebody that was subpar, the other 2 business analysts said, you know what, we'll just work a little extra overtime,
Yeah.
and we'll just make it happen, because they felt, and rightly so, that bringing on somebody that didn't have the experience was going to actually drag them down. But I see too often, founders just look at, well, get me somebody from, uh, Workday, or what's the what's the web out there, the job boards and stuff like that. But I don't want to spend any more than $10, and I don't care if they're in XYZ country. Okay, well, there's pros and cons to that. So we have to be careful. What are we hiring people for, and am I going to still get the value out of them that I'm expecting?
Right. And I think you just mentioned earlier that here we are now, we're weighing
Upwork was the website I
Upwork,
was
yeah.
thinking of. Yeah.
Well, we're weighing what is it that we need, what's the position going, like I actually think it's really important to define what the skills and that you need to have are up front. And then it used to be, okay, well, let's find the right person. And yeah, we can hire someone inexperienced or someone over experienced. You have to find that right fit. But now we actually have this complication because you've got AI mixed into there. And just like you could hire cheap to say, well, this person is maybe not experienced enough, but I know they're going to rise to the occasion to do it. You could actually overestimate what AI is going to be capable of doing. And I'm, been talk. A lot of my friends are startup people too, or doing startups, and with this AI thing, it's got everybody's got their creative thing going on, and you know, some people are really gung ho with me having AI like completely replace developers and stuff like that. And I just don't think that you're going to get AI to do everything for you, but maybe AI will make you be more efficient. So
Hmm.
finding the right person with the AI, it's
Yeah.
tricky because now you got you got three columns there. You're really weighing, not just the two.
Well, and then if we look at the next bullet, it's generalists versus specialists. So
Right.
well, I'm a startup. I need 5 roles, right? Do I bring somebody on that's more of a generalist that can handle 3 of these roles, more broad skilled, or do I need more specialists that are going to be experts? And again, that's going to be the situation. Like, what kind of industry are you in? What kind of competition do you
Hmm.
have? You know, like, there's going to be discussions with regard to what type of resource you want. One I said earlier, I love working with startups because I get to wear a lot of different hats, and
Yeah.
not everybody wants that, right?
Yeah.
So you have to find the right person. Also now there's fractional is becoming much more popular out there, and it's not quote unquote part time. It is part time, but it's a different level of part time. So there's full time experienced resources, but there's also part time. I'm going to use the word part time experienced resources that know how to come into an organization and get the vision and be able to execute on with very little supervision. They're there to kind of help get things started. One of the areas that I see a lot of is, companies get their first client or two.
Hmm.
And I ask the question, so who's managing your clients? Well, my senior engineer. No, like, who's contacting that client, who's nurturing that client, who's making sure that they're happy and that we're getting feedback from them. It's a very different role, but that's a very easy one for somebody that's in an experienced person that wants to do that kind of on a part-time, until the point where you get more volume where it warrants a full-time person. But again, it goes back to the conversation earlier about sometimes founders don't know what they don't know because they've never seen the successful
Yeah. Or
um,
maybe you're in new
resource.
territory.
Yeah, it's a whole different
And
resource.
yeah, and I think it's important that these evaluations need to be done on a role by role basis.
Hmm.
In your startup, maybe you might need a specialist because you're doing something scientific. So you may need a very deep knowledge specialist with a narrow scope of what they're going to accomplish because that's like the bread and butter of what you're going to do. And maybe a different role, let's say sales, you can get someone who's a great salesperson but has other skills that could cover the other roles. So
Absolutely.
you can't just say it's always going to be generalist and it's always going to be this. It's every single role you have to do this analysis for and continue to do that.
Yep.
And I think this is the case on not just for startups because we are talking about startups and founders, but also just new strategic initiatives in big companies. And we didn't really make that clear that these kinds of strategies don't always apply to just small companies.
Oh, absolutely agree. And I think, you're absolutely right, Steve. It's all situational, and as the founder, so this is like we've given you the ability to get out of the weeds on delivering the product. Now, it's not like you're going to be sitting around twiddling your thumbs. Now, your role as the founder is to make sure we're making good hiring decisions. And I do lean into this last comment a lot because, if you bring on everybody and you give them a C-suite role in a company that has one client, at some point you're going to be disappointed with at least one of them. And that's a hard thing to do when you're starting up is, so I lean away from giving everybody a big title in startups until they've gotten a chance to kind of get their feet wet, prove themselves, show you, that they understand what it takes to live and breathe in a startup environment, because it is very different than a large organization. And not everybody is cut out for it. Not everybody likes it, so don't promise people things that cause them to want to stay just because they have the title.
Well, and
So
also the even if you're let's say you're CTO in a startup right now, I mean, because sometimes it is hard to get away from doing that. It just needs to be really clear that you're a CTO in a 3-person organization's also the software engineer and
right,
the network specialist and the
exactly.
support desk and all of those things.
That's right. You're going to wear a
Yeah,
lot of hats, and
exactly.
it's going to be very tactical in many
Right.
cases, many ways. But yeah, so really, I mean, the main thing here is to really think about your organization, think about the resources you need, and make sure you take the time to pick the right people. The old adage was what, um, you know, hire slow, fire fast, right? So take your time. So the next thing we want to talk about is just, growth. So we've got our first client, we're starting to get some traction. We've got, some people on board, like where's that growth going to come from? And I want to stress in the fact that, delivery is your engine of growth. So execution on the plan is how you grow. And, how you take, how you bring those first clients on board to get them to be referenceable clients, how you make sure that you're maximizing the adoption on your product. And I'll explain that in a little bit here. And then make room for expansion and partnerships. So these are the big pillars of how companies grow. And the first one we're going to talk a little bit about is just, getting those first clients and making sure they're referenceable. And this is where I was saying, it's like, we're going to throw the product over the fence. The client's going to be able to use their chat bot and they should figure out how to use it on their own. Well, that normally doesn't work. And then, how are they getting feedback to you? How are they feeling engaged? The delivery engine is really super important for those first couple clients. And then the maximizing the product adoption. This is an area that I see organizations miss a lot, because you might have gotten that first client, and let's just, I do a lot with SaaS, so obviously my examples are a lot like SaaS related. But let's say it's an organization of 30,000 employees, and your product is a enterprise product that literally all 30,000 could utilize. You start the implementation, you're doing one department, it's got 1,000 people. All right, thrown over the fence. Sales is often running on getting new salespeople. We're leaving 29,000 users on the table. Like who's managing that adoption of your product? Because what will happen if you don't have somebody that managing that, that client may be happy with 1,000 users and they might be happy, but you left 29,000 of revenue sitting over there. So who's the person that's managing that relationship? Traditional salespeople aren't managing a relationship. Traditional salespeople are all finding the next prospect. So you need to make sure you have that role filled. And then also too, if they're not happy, how are you managing the expectations and trying to solve their problems, making sure that they're, getting the return on investment that they expected out of your product. And then third piece is where, okay, we're making some traction, we're getting some margin. What's my roadmap look like? Like, what's my vision? Where do I want the organization to go? Do I think we can grow by having additional market segments, channels, or is it growth by product features or maybe new products? So having that kind of strategy with regard to how am I going to grow my organization is really important
Yeah.
for founders. Because again, you finally let things go. Now let's get up in the helicopter and look at what's my strategy for bringing more business to this organization.
Yeah, and I think we're talking right now about tech or software specifically, but also tech. Retention in tech or software is like the probably one of the most important things you're going to want to focus on. But I think that applies to everything. Like
I
if
think you're
you
right.
if you sell like we're talking B2B right now, but if you're talking B2C, you still want your customer to be happy with the product that they bought from you. And like a one-time sales, you want a repeat customer, you want them to be bragging about it, you want them to be using your tool. But in tech especially, retention is critical. That does require skills like a success manager to
Hmm.
manage those customers in tech, because even in the most intuitive products in the world, people need help with. And everybody, because like let's just talk chat right now, chat GPT or an AI. Those things are out there, everyone's using them, but most of us are just scratching the surface on what these things can do. Those companies still are losing money, not making money yet. Most of them have to figure out, okay, how are we going to get, not only are they each one of these new two techs having to fight each other, and they're looking for business from companies like us who use their back ends for stuff like that. They're going to need to figure out, how do we get into these enterprises outside the consumers and get the enterprises to trust us and get the enterprises to really roll it all the way out. That's a big kind of war going on with all of this. But the same thing applies to software as a service. And I think it applies to any kind of product, that if you roll out a new product, competition is going to be all over you right away. How do you defend yourself? How do you make sure that the tools that you sold are things that people want to keep buying from you?
Yeah.
Number one thing.
Yeah. And this is where the founders need to be spending their time, right? And
Yeah, for
making sure that
sure.
they're keeping an eye on as to where the market is going and where the competition is going and how we're going to respond to, challenges in the marketplace.
Yeah, and I think this, like, we could just take this at a restaurant example, right? A lot of
Mhm.
times you'll see an owner, a builder owner of a restaurant, they're there making sure the customers are happy. Is the food okay? I mean, like, if you think about it, you can break this all down into like the simplest of of things to do. Totally agree with you that the success is critical. That's where you're going to find the maximizing of the product development, by talking to the customers. You're in that middle bullet there. You'll find it by talking to them. And then, like what you mentioned before, how do you look outward at, while you're doing all this, also figuring out what's the next move?
Yep,
Like,
exactly.
do you have partners? What, how are you going to, and partnerships take a whole nother level of relationship management.
It absolutely does. And so that's like where we're kind of like, there's four engines I see of sustainable growth that you have to be thinking about. One is your new customers. How am I going to get
Yeah,
those
that's
new
the
customers?
start.
Right? The next
Yeah.
is those existing customers, but and I know people have heard this before and I'm going to repeat it. It's easier to sell to an existing customer than it is to find a new customer. The
Mm.
the 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 conversion rate for new customers is 5 to 20%. This is in SaaS, but 5 to 20% of prospects. The conversion rate for existing customers is over 60%. So if you've got customers that are happy with you and you have new products or new features that cost more money, it's much easier to get those clients to trust you because they already have trust with you, to try the new things. So it's not something to sneeze at. And so you really have to have a strategy. This is why I tell startups and stuff, you cannot just toss your product over to those first couple clients and ignore them. Like there's one company I was talking to, wasn't one of my clients. It's like, they were so busy selling. They were having so much success selling. Their first client, they didn't talk to for like 6 weeks. I'm like,
Oops.
that's a problem. That's a problem. And then partnerships, like who would be good partners? And I have a bit of experience on this one too. And I always tell people partnerships are hard. Partnerships are hard for a lot of reasons because it has to be two-way. And so often, and it might be the one thing that I would say for startups, maybe, depending on if that's the delivery mechanism through partnerships, but if it's not the delivery mechanism or the distribution channel, you might want to be hesitant about that, because so often we say, oh, we want an integration with this, we want an integration with that. Well, they're not going to sell for you unless there's value both ways. So too often I see companies where they get all these integration partners and then two of the integration partners actually add value. Volume, you see where you see that traction. So partnerships takes a lot of work, and you have to be very, very strategic with regard to what kinds of partnerships you want and what you're giving for what you're getting. And that whole win-win, attitude has to be there. And then the fourth one is new products, which brings into new channels and things like that. So to be able to have a sustainable organization, you need these 4 engines to be running with a strategy in place that you've communicated, that you've got people that understand that strategy and are executing on that strategy.
Yeah, that's really good.
And then the last thing we want to talk about, we're going to show a little bit more about Project Insight and how that integration works. Integration in the last comment was maybe not the best word, but integration within an organization is amazing. Too often I see different departments, they have their strategic planning sessions in December or whatever. Everybody gets on the same page. Things seem to be all aligned. Everybody's starting off the year well. But then the reality hits. Something changes. We end up with clients we weren't expecting, or we have a client that leaves, or we have some technical challenges that happen. And then the priorities and the communication between the different groups starts failing, where sales is trying to meet their commitments on revenue, but there were some issues with the technology that caused the product team to pivot from the plan to fix that. Now sales is behind the 8 ball, products behind the 8 ball, customer success is just trying to stay up with the issues. The founder, the senior executives of the organization, one of the things I see most important for them to be doing is making sure everybody is all working together with the same priorities, and making sure that when things do change, we all are in agreement with how that impacts everybody. Like I said earlier with partnerships, if partnerships aren't a strategy, which happened one time with me, partners weren't a big strategy, I got nothing out of the product team. So I really was having a hard time even talking with partners, because, they wanted to have, some interaction, but product was off doing their product roadmap and I wasn't part of it. So there's definite negatives if you don't have all of these areas working well together. And what I do love about, the Project Insight tool, and Steve, you can kind of show us some, is how it totally improves that communication.
Yeah, hang on a second. Let me move this out of the way. All right. Yeah, I mean, what she was just talking about a minute ago with integrating everybody, one of the things that Project Insight can help with, obviously there's we talked about a lot of soft skills today,
Yes.
meaning
A ton.
picking the right people, bringing them all in. These are all things that project managers do have to do, and also founders, CEOs, anybody trying to hire any managers. But how do you keep everybody on the same page? And a tool like Project Insight can help with that. What you're seeing here on this view is a portfolio we have. And you maybe when you're a startup, you don't have portfolios and programs and all these things going on, but all your initiatives are at least your one portfolio. You have one portfolio of all the things you're trying to do, and you might want to break them down into projects like this. So here I have a new initiative called digital customer experience, but that could be just your whole company right now. And under here, I've got all the projects that I've got going on. These might be things you're working on. If you have a small team, you may only have a couple projects, but maybe you're a startup with 20 people or 30 people, depending on your funding levels. You would want to have all the different things going on. A quick overview of that. I can see here all the different projects, what the statuses are, who is responsible for that. This can really help with what we were just talking about before. Who's responsible for what? What are the dates we're trying to do? This is just a list view of that, but in Project Insight, you can see the same project information in multiple different ways. This is a list where I can edit it right here, change the statuses, update the health. I can also see it in a Gantt chart. So I have my timelines, and these are my milestones. So
I
these
mean,
might
the thing
be,
is, yeah, once you
yeah,
change it, everybody sees
yeah,
the
everyone can
changes.
log in to see
Right.
it. So the idea is to collaborate digitally. Back in the day, everyone used to just be in the office and someone might print something like this out and it'd be on a bulletin board. Well, most people these days are now remote, working on people across the world and collaborating together. I didn't even mention, but in Project Insight can also manage the tasks that people are doing, and they can be collaborating, and all this rolls up so that you don't have to do spreadsheets all over the place. So this could save you some time by having a tool like Project Insight to manage this. A different type of view is a Kanban, is what they call this, or a board view. And here we have all of our different projects and what phase they're in here. So this is in discovery, this is in planning, this is in execution. This is a great view to use also with your team to get everyone on board, because it's really easy to see where things are. And I have a lot going on here, but if you have if when you do have a lot, it's actually good to see what are the things that we're closing out on, what are the things we're in the middle of. You might also take a Kanban view that's different, like what are the priorities, what initiatives are the highest priorities. These are the critical things, and these are the low priority things on the left. So on the right are the high priority, and the middle is the medium and the high. This, you can just drag and drop these into different columns. It does help you visualize what those projects are, what those priorities are, what we talked about earlier, trying to find everything, and how critical is it into what you're trying to do. And then a final thing that can help startups and founders is, in Project Insight, we have the ability to track how busy everybody is based on all of these projects. So here I have a resource allocation view where I can see from July on how busy I am. It looks like we're green right now, but Andrew's a little bit red this week. That might help you see, oh wait, we're probably not going to get everything we want done on that date. So it's better to find out before a conflict happens than it is to find out after you missed a deadline and told a
Mhm.
customer a deadline and everything got missed. So keeping track of your hours and your priorities. Here's another resource that's over allocated, and that can really help you keep things organized and tell you, we need more resources in this area. So as you start to scale, you'll want to track these things. If you start doing this right away, it's a lot easier. I can't tell you how many big companies really big companies, they want to be able to do this, and they have a hard time doing this too.
Getting it started.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it's not just a startup thing. It's actually easier for a startup to do this, because if you set it up right away in the beginning, before you scale, it becomes part of your culture, part of what you're doing. If you do it later, now you got to wrangle people who might have been working there for 20 years, or in a bigger company. Wait, you want me to keep track of how busy all these people are? Oh, in a way they are doing it, everyone does it,
Mhm.
but maybe not in a efficient way. And this is an
Mhm.
easy way to do it because you don't have to have a separate report that you're keeping up and keeping that all manually updated. This happens
We're
automatically.
having a meeting where everybody's asking the questions, "When's this gonna be ready? When's this gonna be ready? When's this gonna
Yeah.
be ready?" So, no, I totally agree. It's when we think about the product management group, the support, the customer success, customer success is gonna hear when problems are happening, right? And
Yep.
they, many times companies are using Jira and maybe they're putting in Jira tickets. So, having the visibility into what's happening at the customer level, having visibility into what's going on at the
Hmm.
product level, having giving the sales team the ability to kind of even document what the market's saying as to where we think we should be going, from what's selling. Because a lot of times I see companies where they're building things without actually asking the sales team what would sell, you
Yeah.
know?
Or
And
doing the market research
yeah,
for that matter.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Awesome.
Yep.
Awesome. All right. So let's come back here. And again, the whole point of this webinar is to give founders and owners an opportunity to think about, if I get out of the weeds, what am I going to do? Well, there's a lot to do. There's a lot
I
to
don't.
do.
There's no shortage of that.
There's no shortage of that. But
No.
if you
There's always
don't,
something.
yeah, and then if you do not do some of the things we're talking about today, you're going to see a lot more wasted time. You're going to see a churn on your funding that you didn't expect because people were doing things that they shouldn't have been doing because they weren't aligned with your priorities. You're going to see product decisions being made that were bad, that weren't things that clients actually wanted or would pay for. Unhappy clients, lower trajectory. So again, we don't fail. They don't fail to scale because they run out of opportunities. They fail because they outgrow how they operate.
Hmm.
So they try to keep doing everything the way they were doing it before with bubble gum and duct tape, right? And as you get larger, that just won't work. That really won't work. And so as we close here today, I'm going to give you a couple things to think about. The QR code is an assessment that I have put together for firms that are interested in kind of ranking themselves and seeing how they are compared to others. But I'm going to give you a couple things to do after today. I want you to think about define your top 3 hires. Like really think about what the best source of that hire is going to be, and take the time to do that. Secondly, is I want you to articulate that authority that you're giving them. Be very, very clear. Having looked at a lot of resumes lately and a lot of job descriptions, they're way too vague. They include everything. Every
Hmm.
person needs to be everything. And people are going to do their resume on chat, and then some AI is going to evaluate their resume and it's still not going to find you because everything's way too vague. I want you to be very, very specific with regard to what are the key things to success for those individuals, and give them that authority and step back and let them do it. Because you've taken the time to really evaluate what kind of resource you need. The third thing is I want you to really obsess over delivery. Like, do not toss your product over the fence. Make sure that your delivery is a positive experience for your clients. And this is, goes to our project managers in the room, is, making sure that the project managers know that the strategy, not the strategy, but the ROI the client was expecting, and help and let those project managers really work with those clients to make sure that they've achieved that ROI. And if not, let's get that feedback and figure out why, you
Yeah, and
know?
this is one of those workflows we were talking about at the beginning. What she's describing is what's that you've got your sales deal closing. Now what? Well, it goes over, the requirements are documented, the success manager takes over, here are the materials for that. That whole process is one of those things we talked about way early in the beginning.
Yep.
You're going to want to define that.
Yep. Absolutely. and
And refine it constantly. We're refining
constantly
it as well.
refine it. And
Yep.
you got to have those feedback loops. And too often, and I know I'm sounding negative today, but I'm giving you examples of things I've actually seen. Like, we hear the feedback and then we do nothing about it, or we say, oh no, that's just them, like we just discount it. And I'm like, I think we should have a process for evaluating that feedback and determining whether or not this is a one-off or whether it's a trend.
Mm-hmm.
Data driven decisions is really where we need to go, and not just off the cuff, which when you're in that founder kind of environment, a lot of it might be off the cuff. But as you get a little bit more scale, it can't be, because you'll end up making bad decisions. And then be responsible for reviewing how each system is collaborating. Founders need to evolve from being just problem solvers to being system builders,
Mm-hmm.
to make sure they're building the systems within the organization with the right skill set that will give them the maximum trajectory and success for the organization. And that's the end. So, any questions?
No, I didn't see any coming in.
Okay. Well, let's give you your QR code. Everybody waiting patiently for that QR code to claim their PDU. So take your cameras out. We'll be Matt today. Take your cameras
Yeah.
out.
Gotta get that QR code and we'll send you the PDU.
Right.
And great.
And then if you need to reach out to us, we're providing you our contact information. Matt, if anybody wants a demo of the system, you
Yep.
can reach out to Matt, who's not here today. He's on vacation, but he'll be ready and roaring, ready to meet you next week.
That's
and if
right.
you have any comments or questions and you want to reach out to me, there's my contact information as well.
Yeah, remember to like and subscribe, right? That's when you got to
Absolutely.
comment in the chat for that.
Absolutely.
Then if you need any help with your startup, Diane is a great resource to do that. So reach out to her.
And I think you saw the banner came across during the session today, but there's a session on
Yep.
the 30th of July about getting started with capacity planning.
Yeah, and we'll show you how to do top-down capacity, bottom-up capacity. How do you handle, the ongoing business as usual work is what a lot of people tend to call it. So we'll go over how to set that up, what the best practices are on your capacity. And obviously we showed that a little bit today. The number one thing is just putting the data into the tools and you'll be able to get that information.
And maintaining it.
And maintaining it. Yeah, definitely keep your projects up to date. But
that's right.
You know what? That's a lot easier than waiting and not keeping them up to date. And then later at the end of the month, having to go figure out what those dates really are, because you're going to eventually have to figure that out.
I agree. And then here's all the social media links, and we appreciate everybody's time today.
Yeah, and we're getting into Reddit now, which is a new area, so check that out.
Cool.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.